It's a landmine. Effectively, once you hit certain limits and it's assessed, the taxation office will call on money even though you haven't sold the asset.
Taxing people for money they don't have is a pretty dangerous business.
Labor said it would double the tax on super fund earnings from 15% to 30% if they have more than $3 million in them.
And the people who are going to be hit the hardest are the millennials, because by the time it gets to their time to take their super, they'll be way over 3 million.
Jim Chalmers also proposed taxing unrealised gains. In other words, a tax on a gain even if you haven't sold that asset.
But what unrealised gains tax is a combination of how rateable units apply to land, and it's based on the clock, on the calendar, on time, and also based on thresholds. So, yeah, for example, if you've got, let's take an investment property and you buy it for $1 million, there's a threshold that once the Valuer and General's Office, which would be one of the measuring governing bodies that would dictate the valuation of that, so it hits a certain level, that would then trigger a realisation of a tax. And people say, well, how does that work? It's no different to an allocated pension. Once you hit a certain level, or in superannuation today, if you are fortunate enough to have $3 million in your super fund, once that trigger account balance hits that level, that tax moves from 15% to 30%. So with the systems and the technology and the data matching today, they certainly have the capability of measuring the valuation to a level. How they facilitate that and manage that is yet to be sort of to pan out, but it is a real problem. I'd be very concerned about it. I am very concerned about it for my own, for myself and for my own clients. To what level, what assets get characterised that way? I think it's from what I've heard, it's been I don't think there's as much thought of the infrastructure that's gone applied to it, because if that applies to listed companies, in theory that has to apply to unlisted companies. That applies then to proprietary limited companies, SME, a self-employed person. So where does that end? If it applies to CSL or BHP, does it apply to an accountancy firm that does $5 million in revenue and XYZ in profit, opposed to a small, medium enterprise or a self-employed person? So that's on the equity side. On the investment side, who does that apply? Does the unrealised gains apply to corporations, trusts, individuals? So I don't think a lot has been thought through from the Labor Party on how that would be unfold, but it's a wait and see. I mean, it's interesting now that they've come out and mentioned that now post the election. It certainly wasn't part of their campaign, but I think it's significant enough to certainly see swinging voters in the next election if it does unfold. So. Very concerning for superannuants and investment property owners, people that own direct shares. Where does it end? And so it's a trigger no different to certain caps. That it's a landmine. Effectively, once you hit certain limits and it's assessed, the taxation office will call on money even though you haven't sold the asset. One of the major things, and I'll end on this, is that the biggest problem we've got, of course, in property is that the investment property, it's not applicable at this point to family homes, my understanding, but the biggest problem you've got, of course, most people with investment properties are probably geared to significant levels, almost to the caps, the maximum levels. The serviceability's been a challenge in a high interest rate environment. If there was a capital gains tax from a property in Glen Iris, I'm just making that as an investment property that went from 1.5 to 2 million, and there's a realisation on that. How does the individual fund the tax when there's no more to be borrowed and there's no money in cash from that individual? So how does that person fund the tax? Is there a lien against that particular property? And like they do in certain nations in Europe, that if it's unfunded, it sits there against the debt and collected upon sale. You know, an economist brought that up to me yesterday. Well, how the hell do they run that if there's no money in the tin? Well, I've seen that happen in certain nations, particularly Norway and Germany, where they can take a lien against the property and the clock's ticking on an interest-bearing debt that is picked up on sale, as it would be if it was sold without the realisation tax. So a lot of water going under the bridge, and I'm surprised that it was aired the way it was. You know, but the limitations of how far, where does it start and where does it end on different investment instruments.